Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm here today to tell you all about mindfulness, and not only mindfulness, but also compassion. And when we put mindfulness and compassion together, we get a practice that most people refer to as heartfulness. I don't really use that in the sort of titles and marketing because it's a little less known than mindfulness, but really that's what heartfulness is. It's about being mindful, meaning paying attention to what's happening, to ground ourselves in the present moment, and to have a non-judging awareness, a loving awareness of what's going on, both outside of us and inside of us, right? And then to hold that, to live that way with inside the loving arms of compassion, and to see the world through the eyes of compassion. And that includes, of course, compassion for all of those people and animals and situations and everything out there, but also compassion for what's going on in here. Okay. And so in this podcast, what I do is I give you some ideas and some principles and some, sort of philosophies on how, on the way this all works. And then most importantly, I talk about practices. But now here's the thing, right? There's only so much I can give you on these YouTube channels, right? Even if I were to, give you a full course on mindfulness, it's, with all the different practices, right? It's not one size fits all so much, right? And so you might be doing some of the practices and they might be going really well, but there might be other things that are feeling like, well, if only this thing felt a little different, or if only that thing felt a little different. And if that's the way you feel, if you're getting kind of held up on some things, or maybe some things feel maybe even a little confusing to you, well, then maybe you could use some coaching. Okay. And I'm here to offer that coaching. And I have many different ways in which I can offer coaching. Actually, I'm about to start yet another group coaching course. It's going to start hopefully in the next week or so. I'll be announcing that probably in about 2 weeks. It'll start. So I'll start announcing it by like the end of next week, because it's going to be a course on self-compassion. And this was actually somebody emailed me the other day, said, "Hey, Art, I want to join your self-compassion group on Thursday nights. So send me the link." I was like, that sounds like a great idea. When am I going to start doing that? And so I'm doing it, right? So, and that's the thing, right? But there's everything from like the group coaching, which is pretty specific in terms of the, self-compassion. In this one, I did one about anger a few months ago. And then there's other more general group coaching, which is just show up, do a guided meditation, ask a couple of questions, throw a couple of bucks in the hat and you're good, right? Or there's one-on-one coaching in which you and I enter into a journey together in which we really travel some great distances together. You do the traveling, I'm there to help and to guide you, right? And so this becomes a much more intense experience, right? And something that's much more, again, super customized, right? When we spend 45 minutes every single week, 45 to 60 minutes really every single week, we really get into some deep stuff and then really start to understand like where in your life things are getting caught up. Right. And this can be really, really helpful, and actually, let's go ahead and segue into today's one of today's topics. As you know, I'm playing with the format here a little bit on this podcast. So I'm going to do like two sort of 10-minute or 12-minute or so segments. Okay, so the first segment I want to talk about is, and I know I kind of touched on this the other day, but I think it's so important that let's talk about it again, because maybe something will come out a little differently today, in which case it's going to maybe, come through to you a little bit differently. Okay. And so what I'm talking about here is self-awareness, right? And really self-awareness is, gosh, the light is coming in, so I'm in a basement right now, right? But there's like an aluminum, well outside the basement. So right now the sun is hitting, probably bouncing off a window and then bouncing off the, cause this is facing west, but bouncing off this stainless steel or aluminum and coming right back to me. And this light looks like it's never looked better than this. So anyway, thank you for that. Thank you for indulging me, and thank you, son. I appreciate you. So anyway, if we look at all the different modalities of meditation practice, right? And like whether it's mindful meditation or it's vipassana meditation, which is like a body scan, or it's even transcendental meditation, which is more like a mantra based kind of thing, right? Or walking meditation or yoga or virtually any modality of this kind of work, right, is all, again, like I said the other day, yes, at the end of it, we get a sense of, relaxation. We get a sense of maybe that bliss feeling, what some people call their Zen feeling, right? Like we get those things out of the practice. Yes, that's true. But that is by no means the reason why we do the practice, because what we're doing with these practices is we're learning about ourselves. Okay, and this is really, really important. That's why, again, I'm talking about this again, and I want to tell a personal story about this too, because something really kind of kooky happened yesterday. And by the way, yeah, I wasn't here yesterday. You didn't miss a video. I didn't make a video yesterday or a podcast episode, and I'm going to get into why that is, and that's going to really tie into this concept of self-awareness, right? Because as we develop our self-awareness, right, not only is it one of the very foundational, what Daniel Goleman calls the five key domains of emotional intelligence, right? Which is, it all starts with self-awareness, right? Because from self-awareness comes the ability for self-regulation. Right. And from self-regulation comes the ability to motivate ourselves. Right. And from that motivation or along with that motivation becomes, or let me go back to the self-awareness that as we deepen the self-awareness even more, and we understand ourselves a little more, now we're able to understand others. And that's where empathy comes in. Right. And then, of course, all of this put together equals social skills, right? Because now we know how to kind of navigate the nuanced, interactions that we have with all the people in our lives all the time, right? And so on one level, on a very sort of clinical level, self-awareness is the key to all of that beautiful stuff, right? The key to all of it. And really what emotional intelligence is the ability to function in the world, right? I mean, there's nothing, I mean, it's no smaller than that, right? I mean, it's huge, right? But let's go even further, right? Like, what is self-awareness really doing for us, right? Because it's even bigger than, well, it's kind of tied into what Daniel Goleman's talking about. But in my opinion, it's even maybe a little bit bigger, right? Because self-awareness, what it ultimately does is it ultimately allows us to see the source of our suffering, right? And normally in almost every circumstance, and I mean seriously, like 99.9999% of the time, right? Now, before I say this statement, let's get one thing very, very clear, okay? There's a difference between pain and suffering. Okay, and that's a really important thing to understand, right? So if I like many years ago in 1997, I was assaulted by a couple of guys. Now I was walking around like just way more drunk than any human being should be, and that made me an easy target for a couple of guys who had nefarious intentions and probably were, they were in this society in which they were most likely, whether they're addicted to drugs, I don't know. Whether they're homeless, I don't know. But the system of this society had beaten them down to the point where they were, so desperate that the only way that they could survive was to hurt me and to take my money, right? And hurt me they did, right? They beat me, like, because I tried to fight back, foolishly. I tried to fight back. And I mean, I was nearly killed, like literally they stabbed me in the leg. They hit like a branch of an artery. I lost like, I don't know, more than half the blood in my body bled out on Canal Street, very aptly, in New York City. And they just like stomped the crap out of me. Like my face looked like hamburger meat or something, it was like really, really crazy. I don't like to use that word. I apologize, but it was very extreme, the beating that I received, and the pain was very real, right? I mean, I was in a tremendous amount of pain, right? But here's the thing. In the wake of that pain, right? The pain eventually, recedes, and the physical damage eventually heals, right? The vein healed, the stitches that the sutures came out, and the skin started to heal. My face came back to its beautiful glow, from this like really horrible, beaten up thing, right? And it all, all that stuff happens, right? But yet I was still suffering because of shame, right? Like, I'm supposed to be a tough guy. Tough guys don't get mugged like that. I'm New York City born and bred. I'm supposed to be more smart than I'm not supposed to be an easy mark for those guys. Tremendous levels of shame that I felt, tremendous levels of guilt, tremendous levels of fear, right, that came from that. And that's truly a PTSD moment, right? Like, that is a traumatic event. And so in the wake of that, it would be very understandable if there were nightmares and there were, intrusive thoughts, and there were even maybe panic attacks that came through this, right? Through this traumatic experience. But as I've said on this show before, that didn't traumatize me that much because I had a system of support around me, right? I was with someone who cared about me a lot. I had friends who cared about me a lot. As abusive as my parents were, when things like that happened, they actually were pretty good. They snapped into it, and they, that was one thing they did well, right? They took care of other people who were sick. And that's actually going to get into what I'm talking about here in a second, as far as what happened to me yesterday. But the idea here is that, that the suffering is, again, it's different from the pain, right? Like, everyone's going to feel pain, right? If they get stomped and stabbed and beaten and robbed, right? Like, you're going to feel pain, right? But I could have suffered a lot more than I wound up suffering. The suffering could have been prolonged. The suffering could have been made it even worse, right? And on a smaller level, we can talk about this too, right? Like in the traffic jam that I talk about all the time, right? You're driving along the road, you're a little late for an appointment, and all of a sudden, bumper to bumper traffic. What am I going to do? Everything's at a standstill. I have a choice now, right? The traffic is the traffic, right? But I could suffer as a result of this traffic if I get angry and I squeeze my steering wheel, I bang my dashboard and say, why does this happen to me? Now I'm suffering, right? Or I could take a deep breath. I could say, yeah, this is very inconvenient. Let me make a call that I can make to mitigate the damage and just accept what's happening, right? In either of those instances, or even those choices that I've made, the traffic doesn't change, right? The traffic is just the traffic. But yet in one situation, I'm relatively okay, just inconvenienced and going to make the best of it. In the other, I'm devastated, right? Like, I'm really suffering. Right. So pain, the traffic is inevitable, right? We're all going to run into traffic jams. We're all going to, have people try to hurt us in our lives. But the level at which we suffer is really up to us. And again, that suffering is almost always, and this was the statement I was about to make before I got sidetracked, to make sure that we understand the difference between pain and suffering, because a lot of people don't understand that. So once we've established the difference between pain and suffering, now we can understand that the suffering is almost always caused by either the unwillingness to accept what has happened, accept the traffic jam, accept the fact that, yeah, I'm not as tough as I imagined myself always to be, right? Accepting that and then letting go, right? Letting go of the idea of, that I have to drive to work without a traffic jam, or that I deserve not to get beaten up, right? Like, let go of those thoughts, and now I'm no longer suffering, right? And so in this place of non-suffering, now I can start to see like what's really going on here, right? And that's when I can start to see, and as I deepen that self-awareness, I can start to see like, oh, when I try to resist that thing, that's when things get worse. And yet when I let go of this thing, things start to feel a little bit better. We start to become aware of this. And that's not something that I can tell you, right? That's not something that any therapist can tell you. They can tell you what to look for, and so can I, of course, but that thing inside you is specific and unique to you every bit as much as your fingerprint blueprint is and your genetic coding is, right? There's only one you. And that, so all of this applies, right? That there's only one you. So the thing that makes you suffer is going to be different from the thing that makes me suffer. And to self-awareness, right? That's the key now. The self-awareness allows us to see that thing that's for me. And this just happened yesterday. Okay, so this is really exciting. So it wasn't exciting yesterday, but I think we're going to call this segment 2, okay? Because I'm going to run out of time here. So we're going to kind of go into segment 2 here. So segment 2 is going to be a personal story here today, okay? So the idea of I'm just going to write down what time so I can put this in the description. So what happened to me yesterday? Let me just tell you this story, okay? So I'm trying to remember exactly what triggered it. So the my wife and I have a couple of agreements, right, of how we do things in the house, right? Just in terms of like kind of dividing responsibilities, right? And it's not like a demanding thing. It's meant to be very fair. It's meant to be loving and compassionate and everything, right? But there's a division, right? We're like, this is your responsibility, this is my responsibility, right? And the reason this came up is because I had this, when I started to first look at my trauma, and I've told you all this story before, right? Like 10 years ago was when this whole process started, and it really started by me putting down the bottle, right? That's what started this whole thing, is me saying no more of the alcohol that was numbing me and anesthetizing me and distracting me and fogging my mind. I had to, so that was the first step. The second step was my diet and healing from a diet standpoint. And the third step was the mindfulness and the compassion. All these things happen very quickly, like within a year or so, it was all done and all in motion, right? But here's the thing, right? Up until that point, right? And even after that point, right? Because the transition took quite a long time, right? I never looked at my trauma before then, right? Like I was never able to see the trauma, right? And it was only actually very recent, like within the last year, that after all this transformation, and again, after the self-awareness became deep enough, that I said, holy moly, wait a minute. No, you are traumatized, Art. I never thought I was. I mean, I always just dismissed, my parents. They were just, they were strict, Yeah, I got spanked, and I'm one of these people who say, well, I turned out fine. Right. Fine. Let's define fine. We'll need like 3 episodes to do the mental gymnastics that makes me feel like I'm fine, right? From the spanking that I received. No, it was abuse. It was straight up abuse. My mother was not able to control herself. She was not able to manage her rage. She was not able to see the trigger and to regulate herself. She was very emotionally unintelligent. And for sure, borderline narcissist. Like that's also very clear to me now, right? And so what I never realized was how much my own behaviors and my own aversion and my own clinging were tied to that abuse and that sense of everything that I went through, right? The trauma that I went through, right? And of course, it wasn't just the ragey, beatings. There was also a constant threat of abandonment, right? I've told you this story, and I'm just going to repeat it real quick, that, like it was, I think, a couple of nights a week or so. It's now, it became years, a few years ago, it became like the Thanksgiving Day joke, right? Before my mom got sick, everybody's sitting around the table and make fun of the fact that, oh, you're going to go out for a pack of cigarettes and not come back again, Mom? Like that was like 3 times a week she would tell us that. Right. And then one time that we were actually driving up to my grandmother's house, and she actually pulled the car over because we were fighting, made us all get out, and drove off. Came right back. But I mean, I was 5. My sisters were like 2 and 3, something like that. Or I guess I was like 6, maybe 7. Right. So when you're growing up in that, and then of course I had the abandonment of my father. right? Who walked out on us and left us with this whole thing, right? And that's how the whole thing gets all kind of, jumbled up, right? And so what happens is, and I never realized that this was part of my trauma, is that for so many years I've been a people pleaser, right? Like I'll do anything to make sure that nobody gets upset in the house, right? And so this translates into, an expectation. And this is where it gets tricky. And I talked about this the other day too, that I feel like I'm a little disorganized here. So let me just kind of streamline this and organize it a little better. So all of these years of my trauma developed a sense of people pleasing, right? Which again means that, and a lot of people who've experienced trauma are people pleasers, right? It's a defense mechanism. It's a coping mechanism, right? It's a response to our trauma, right? And what that means is that, again, what I'm doing is I'm always keeping the peace, right? Like whatever anybody needs, I'm going to make sure they have it. So that way, nobody's going to yell at me, right? That's basically what it is, right? And this also ties into this idea of self-betrayal, right? And here's what I mean by that. So growing up in this environment, right now, fast forward, 30, 40 years, I'm now, say 42 to 52 years old, right? In these 10 years, right? In my people-pleasing and self-betrayal trauma response, right, I was completely selfless in the sense of worrying about what everybody else needs. And this is with my own personal family now, right? So this is my wife and my 2 children, right? And what this translated into was, like if there's a certain, kind of frozen breakfast thing my daughter likes, I will drive to 5 different stores until I find that thing, right? Like I'll drive an hour if I have to get that thing, right? For 2 years, this was part of the argument that was going through my head yesterday when I was raging over this, because I got triggered yesterday with this. For 2 years, I haven't drank coffee now in about 4 years, right? And so for 2 of those years, after I gave up coffee, my wife was still drinking coffee every morning. It might have even been 3 years. And so for 3 years that I did not drink a sip of coffee, my wife didn't have to wake up on a single morning without coffee grinds to make her coffee in the morning, right? And that, even if I had to go, and there were times where I went out to the store, what time? Okay, you close at 10:30? Okay, I can make it. I'll be right there. 10:30 at night, like going in my pajamas. Because, oh my gosh, you don't have coffee. I got to go get coffee, right? So this was people pleasing, right? And this is what I see now. Like this was my trauma response, right? I was trying to keep the peace, right? And so here's the thing, right? So as I'm doing this, I'm also developing this sense somehow that everybody owes me the reciprocation of all of this. And that's where it gets tricky, okay? Because now that becomes my expectation, right? But what am I basing that expectation on? This is where self-awareness comes in, right? Because it's very easy to say that, right? It's very easy for me yesterday. And again, in my, I was triggered because I put something up on the whiteboard and it didn't get bought at the store, right? And one of the things that we've, one of the senses of real urgent responsibility, I said to my wife, I just can't carry everybody anymore. I gotta let go of some of these responsibilities. So she says, I'll take care of the grocery shopping from now on, right? And so there's like 3 or 4 things on the list. Oh, I forgot those. I'm sorry. And they were all the things that I like my nuts and my, spinach and my yogurt and stuff like that. And I was like, God, for all those years, like I killed myself to make sure that everybody had everything they need. And look at how you're repaying me. But now let's take a step back, because in my self-awareness now, and after I, was able to sit with the emotions yesterday and really, not do a podcast, really allow myself almost like to be in a state of grieving. Like I was really just sitting with this and allowing myself to feel all of these emotions that I was feeling over this, right? And in that space of compassionate self-awareness, I realized then it's just not reasonable or fair for me to expect someone else to behave the way I was, because the way I was behaving was unreasonable. Like, it's okay if my daughter didn't get that frozen breakfast that she loves one or two times. It would be okay if my wife didn't have coffee beans on a couple of given mornings, right? That would have been okay. Or if it's that important to her, she could have gone out to the store at 10:30 in her jammies and gotten the, or if she at least had said, "Oh, could you please go get me some coffee beans, please?" That's not what happened. What happened was I was forcing this on everybody. But it's easy to miss that part, right? It's really easy to miss the fact that, that it was an unreasonable level of accommodation that I was doing. And so therefore it's completely unreasonable for me to expect my loved ones to do that same thing for me. It's almost like asking them to act in a dissociated way. It's almost asking them to be mentally unhealthy to accommodate me, right? So now listen, I didn't go to a psychiatrist. I didn't, do YouTube therapy. I just came inside myself, right? I just brought my awareness to what was making me upset. And as you keep going, it's like peeling an onion. You get to this point where it's like, oh my gosh, there it is. I see it now. And now once I've seen it, it's not that it'll never happen again. It's not that I'll never get triggered again, but I'll recognize it more, right? It won't go all day next time. It'll go maybe a half hour, right? And I can come back, right? And now again, it's the awareness that's one thing, right? But if I'm not self-compassionate in this awareness, I'm going to beat myself up. I'm going to feel the guilt. I'm going to feel the shame. I'm going to feel the anger towards myself. I'm going to resent myself. And you get to a place of self-loathing. And that's not going to go anywhere. That's not going to help me to learn. That's not going to help me to grow. And that's not going to help me to prevent the cycle from happening again. So it's not about it. And the irony is, this morning, as you know, I'm doing TikTok videos now. And so I was just browsing. I like to see what other people are doing. I follow specific people who are doing similar stuff to me, psychiatrists and stuff like that, therapists. And so there's one therapist that I follow did 2 videos this morning, one on people pleasing and the other on self-betrayal. I was like, synchronicity. But that's the thing, right? And this is why, right? This is why mindfulness and therapy are like the best marriage ever, right? Like mindfulness practices along with compassion and like heartfulness practices, right? With therapy, oh my gosh, there's no stopping you there, right? Because you'll understand it, and the therapist will help you to put language to it, right? And help you to organize it, help you to linearize the whole thing, right? And then you won't have to suffer the way I did, Well, and I was suffering for a little because I was grasping onto that. I was not letting it go, and I was suffering. And now, and again, now the self-compassion, now this is very important because maybe some of you are going through something like this, right? The self-compassion now, like I'm ultra embarrassed about what I did yesterday. Like, how do I now? Because now here's the other thing, right? Over the course of time, I've gotten much better. So I wasn't like yelling and I wasn't like punching holes in walls or anything like that. But there was a couple of doors slammed. There was a couple of stomping. And it was pretty clear that Dad was not in a happy place, right? And so normally there would be a great amount of shame now, right? And how do I even say anything? No, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let it sit there. But I got to explain this, right? Because if I don't explain it, then our relationship doesn't grow the same way I don't grow, right? And so it's important to be able to have that conversation, right? And I can only have that conversation when I can look at this and say, you know what? It's not my fault, right? Like, I'm not the one that abused myself for all those years, right? I did not create this trigger to my trauma response, right? The trauma response is something actually that I created that was a really wonderful way for me to get through what was threatening me. And I should be very proud of that. It's not a liability, it's a strength, but right now it interferes in my life. And so this is one area, one instance where I've seen that, and now I got to correct it, right? So that's the conversation I can have with my loving wife because I'm holding myself in compassion. If I was beating myself up, there's no way I would be able to do this. Not a chance. Not a chance. All right, folks. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And yeah, I missed you yesterday. I apologize for that. Okay, but again, it was necessary. All right, I was going through some stuff and I needed to work through it. All right, but hope I made up for it today. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. And otherwise, I'll be back on Wednesday with another episode. All right, have a great day, everybody. Wish you well.